My name is Emily Patterson. I'm 31 years old, and I work as a clinical psychologist specializing in family trauma. Ironically, I've spent years helping people navigate the very storms I've never been able to escape in my own life. I was born into the Patterson family, a name that holds weight in the hotel industry, a dynasty known for luxury, power, and a relentless pursuit of success. But not all Pattersons are considered equal. In this family, your worth is measured by how much you contribute to the empire, by how seamlessly you fit into the carefully curated lineage. And me, I've always been the shadow, the one they politely ignored, the one who never quite belonged. My father, Gregory Patterson, was a quiet rebellion in a family of titans, while his siblings took pride in expanding the Patterson hotel chain. My father chose a life of art and simplicity. He was a painter, a dreamer, someone who found beauty in worn-out canvases instead of boardrooms. The family called him the disappointment. I called him Dad. When I was 19, my father died in a car accident on his way back from an art exhibition he was too proud to let anyone in the family attend. His death was swift, but the silence that followed was slower, heavier, more permanent. From that day on, I became invisible, a footnote in a family history that didn't quite know what to do with me. They tolerated me at holidays, spoke to me out of obligation, but I was never really seen. I wasn't building hotels or negotiating mergers. I was simply Emily, the quiet, studious girl who asked too many questions and chose to become a psychologist instead of a hotel executive. In their eyes, I had chosen insignificance. But there was one person who never saw me that way. My grandmother, Celeste Patterson. To the outside world, she was the elegant matriarch who carried the family name with poise and tradition. To me, she was the woman who slipped me lemon cookies when no one was looking, who let me paint in her garden while she sipped tea, who told me stories about her own father, a man who, like mine, valued people over profit. I thought I understood my place in the family on the sidelines, quietly existing. That is, until last Friday afternoon when I accidentally answered a call from my cousin Lucas, thinking it was a client. His voice was rushed, distracted. Yeah, the inheritance meeting's on Sunday. Don't worry, Emily's not invited. Aunt Amanda made sure. Silence. Then panic. Oh, shoot. Wrong number. Forget I said anything. But I couldn't forget. It wasn't a mistake. I wasn't welcome. I wasn't even considered. In that moment, something shifted. Maybe I had accepted being invisible for too long. Maybe it was time to stop standing quietly on the sidelines of my own life. I would be there on Sunday, whether they liked it or not. I had made up my mind I would show up at the inheritance meeting on Sunday, whether they liked it or not. But as I sat in my car that evening, replaying Lucas's careless words over and over, the weight of the past slowly pressed against my chest. This wasn't just about a meeting. It had never been about a meeting. It was about everything they'd taught me to believe about myself. And maybe it was time to finally look back at the parts of my life no one else cared to remember. When my father died, it wasn't just him I lost. My mother, Helena, all but vanished from the family circle, too. She wasn't cut out for the Patterson world. She had married my father for love, not for the family name. And when he was gone, they pushed her aside like she was nothing but an inconvenient reminder of their black sheep. We lived in a cramped third-floor apartment on the edge of the city. I remember the peeling wallpaper, the narrow kitchen, the way winter slipped through the windows no matter how high we turned up the heat. I would spend half the week there, tucked into the small space that somehow felt more like home than any of the Patterson estates. The other half of the week, I lived in my grandmother Celeste's house, the old stone mansion on Willow Creek Avenue, a house full of family portraits, tall arched doorways, and winding staircases that always made me feel like I didn't quite belong. But Celeste never made me feel small. In her quiet way, she stitched me back together, piece by piece, with her stories, her patience, her quiet cups of tea. She used to tell me about her own father, a man who built his fortune from scratch and spent his final years giving it away. You can measure a person's worth by what they choose to hold on to, she would say, her voice soft but steady. Some cling to things. Some hold on to people. And some, she'd tap her chest lightly, hold on to themselves. Her words followed me as I grew up in the shadow of a family that valued acquisition above all else. My Uncle Bernard made sure I never forgot where I ranked. He laughed when I told him I was studying psychology. You'll never make real money talking about feelings. Emily, he smirked over dinner one Christmas. People like us don't waste time on things you can't put in a bank account. I learned to stop trying to defend myself. The family had their world luxury vacations, country clubs, charity galas where they wore their compassion like tailored suits. And I had mine. They stopped inviting me to the summer trips in France, to the elaborate Thanksgiving dinners that graced the social pages. They said I was always welcome, but they never sent me the details. What they didn't know was that while they were toasting champagne in their glass towers, I was the one who stayed behind with Celeste. When her memory first began to slip, it was me who noticed. It was subtle at first, misplacing her reading glasses, forgetting which drawer held her favorite tea. She would wave it off with a laugh, but I knew. I didn't panic. I didn't tell anyone. I simply stayed. As the years passed, I became her quiet anchor. I drove her to her doctor's appointments, cooked her favorite meals, and walked with her through the garden when her joints ached too much for the stairs. She would sometimes sit in the sunroom, her gaze distant, and I'd sit with her in silence, waiting patiently until she returned to herself. The rest of the family rarely visited unless there was a birthday or a business opportunity to discuss. They didn't notice her slipping away, and frankly, I don't think they would have cared. They saw Celeste as the keeper of the estate, the woman who held the key to the family fortune, not as a person who could feel lonely or frightened or forgotten. When Celeste gifted me her old pearl necklace, I didn't understand its weight at first. It was just a simple strand, nothing flashy. But the way she placed it in my hands, the way she looked at me with something almost like relief, it told me the necklace wasn't just a keepsake. It was a message that she saw me, that I mattered, even if no one else thought so. I wore that necklace every time I visited her after that. I never once asked about her will. I never once cared about what I might inherit. My place was never in the paperwork or the asset sheets. My place was beside her until the very end. Maybe that's why they hated me. Because without even trying, I became something they couldn't by her choice. And on Sunday, I would show them exactly what that meant. I had thought the quiet rejection from the family was painful, but I was wrong. That wasn't the true wound. The true wound came later when they stopped pretending, when they turned their quiet dismissal into something sharper, something deliberate. It started small, almost invisible, like a shift in the air. In the months leading up to Celeste's final illness, she began mentioning her will not as formal announcements, but in passing, during our long conversations in the garden or over afternoon tea. She would say things like, "I've been thinking about what will happen to the lake house," or "I want to make sure the right person cares for this place." I didn't press. I never asked for details, but I listened. Apparently, someone else had been listening, too. Soon after, I began to notice patterns that no longer felt coincidental. Family members who had previously ignored me suddenly developed an interest in Celeste's condition. Dinners were arranged without me. Meetings I hadn't been told about cropped up on family calendars. There were whispers behind closed doors, guarded glances at holiday gatherings, and carefully staged moments where my presence seemed neither required nor welcome. It didn't take long before Aunt Amanda made her move. She called a meeting at Celeste's house one afternoon under the pretense of reorganizing the caregiving schedule. I arrived expecting to collaborate, but instead, I was handed a printed timetable that allocated me precisely 2 hours on Sunday afternoons. She smiled, sweet and false, as she explained, "We just want to make sure Mother gets enough rest. Too many visits can overwhelm her." When I protested, Amanda's smile never wavered. "We all have her best interests at heart. Emily, Let's not make this about you. Within weeks, that 2-hour window became a performance. Every time I arrived, one of my cousins, Lucas, Marianne, or Jared would somehow already be there. They would linger just long enough to ensure I had no time alone with Celeste. If I suggested taking her out to the garden, they would suddenly decide to stay for tea. If I asked to help with her medication, Amanda would conveniently appear to handle it herself. They boxed me out with precision, subtle enough to look accidental, calculated enough to make me doubt myself. Worse than their interference were the rumors, quiet suggestions that began spreading through the family like smoke. I heard them secondhand remarks slipped into conversations by well-meaning relatives who didn't realize they were carrying weapons. Emily's spending so much time with Celeste. They'd whisper, "Do you think she's influencing her decisions? You know, while her mind's not so sharp anymore?" I knew exactly where those rumors came from. Amanda was orchestrating the narrative piece by piece, shaping me into the villain in their carefully constructed story. Even the staff began treating me differently. The housekeeper, who used to greet me warmly, now offered short, polite nods. The groundskeeper avoided eye contact altogether. And one day, when I arrived to drop off Celeste's favorite lemon cookies, the gate guard who had known me for years stopped me. "I'm sorry." "Miss Patterson," he said, visibly uncomfortable. "Mrs. Amanda has given strict instructions. No visitors without prior approval." I stared at him, stunned. I was no longer considered family. I was officially on the outside, but Celeste didn't change. In the quiet spaces they couldn't control, she remained steadfast. She would squeeze my hand when I sat beside her, would ask me to tell her stories from my work, would laugh when I recounted the antics of my therapy dog at the clinic. One afternoon, when I finally managed a few moments alone with her, she motioned for me to come closer. Her fingers were weak, but her eyes were sharp, glinting with something between mischief and certainty. "I want you to have this," she whispered, pressing a small velvet pouch into my palm. Inside was her pearl necklace, the one I had always seen her wear. Simple and unassuming, never flashy enough to attract the attention of the others. To them, it would have been just another trinket. To me, it was everything. It was her trust, her quiet way of saying, "I see you. I choose you." "You'll know when it matters," she added, as if reading my unspoken question. The weight of the necklace in my hand was more than just the pearls. It was the silent confirmation that no matter how much they pushed me aside, she had never done so. They thought they had boxed me out, outmaneuvered me, erased me from her life, but they had forgotten one thing: I had never been there for the inheritance. I had always been there for her. And she knew. They thought they had locked me out for good. They thought their quiet campaign had worked, that I had been erased. But they didn't know me, not really. I had always been patient. I had always known how to wait for the right moment, and that moment had finally come. The inheritance meeting was scheduled for Sunday afternoon at the grand ballroom of the Patterson Central Hotel, the crown jewel of the family's empire. I wasn't invited. Of course, they had made sure of that. The invitations had been sent weeks ago, carefully excluding me as though I no longer bore the Patterson name. But I would be there. I arrived precisely on time, dressed in the deep blue dress my grandmother had once complimented, simple, elegant, deliberate. As I stepped through the polished glass doors, I could feel the weight of every eye turning toward me. The low hum of conversation faltered, replaced by the thick silence of collective disdain. Amanda spotted me first. She was standing near the registration table, her posture stiff, her lips pulled into a cold smile that didn't touch her eyes. "Emily," she said, her voice sweet but slicing. "I'm afraid you've misunderstood. This is a private family event. You weren't expected." I met her gaze steadily. "I know. But I'm here anyway." Lucas, standing just behind her, scoffed under his breath. "It's already settled." "Emily, there's nothing for you here." I didn't respond. I simply walked past them, my heels clicking crisply against the marble floor as I crossed the room. I could feel the sharp stares of my cousins, the carefully veiled disgust of uncles and aunts who had spent years pretending I didn't exist. At the far end of the room, Daniel Hargrove, my grandmother's longtime attorney, stood near a long oak table, adjusting a stack of documents. When he looked up and saw me, a flicker of something relief, perhaps passed across his face. "Miss Emily Patterson," he greeted me formally, loud enough for the room to hear. "I'm glad you've come. Please, have a seat." The family collectively stiffened. Amanda's voice rose in carefully controlled panic. "Daniel, there must be some mistake. Emily wasn't invited. The family has already made decisions regarding the estate." Daniel raised a brow. "Has it? That's curious, considering nothing has been distributed yet. In fact, that would be highly irregular." Bernard stepped forward, his tone sharp. "Let's not waste time. We all know Mother intended for the estate to remain within the core of the family. Emily's involvement was peripheral at best." Daniel calmly opened the file in front of him. "Actually, that's not quite accurate." He paused, his voice measured and deliberate. "Before we proceed, let me be very clear this will was drafted with explicit instructions from Celeste Patterson. I witnessed those instructions myself. And contrary to what you've been led to believe, there is no ambiguity." His fingers tapped the first page. Celeste's entire estate, including the Patterson Central Hotel, all residential and commercial properties, financial accounts, and personal heirlooms, has been left solely to Emily Patterson. The words landed like gunfire in the silent room. Aunt Amanda's face drained of color. Bernard sputtered. "That's impossible. There must be some error. She wasn't of sound mind in her final months." Lucas's voice sharpened. "Emily manipulated her. She took advantage when no one else was around." Daniel didn't flinch. Actually, Celeste anticipated that very accusation, which is why she took exceptional steps to safeguard her wishes. He reached into his leather briefcase and removed a slim black folder. "She recorded video testimonies over the course of 2 years, all verified by independent witnesses, medical assessments, and notarized signatures." He pressed a button on the nearby screen. The room's attention snapped to the large monitor as the image of Celeste appeared, seated comfortably in her sunroom, her voice clear and resolute. "My name is Celeste Patterson. I am of sound mind, and I have made decisions regarding my estate based on years of careful observation. I understand these choices may not be well received, but they are mine." Her gaze, steady and sharp despite her age, seemed to pierce directly into each of us. The room remained frozen as the recording played, documenting not only her reasoning, but her acknowledgement of specific behaviors she had quietly witnessed: who visited, who stayed away, who asked about her health, and who asked about her assets. When the video ended, Daniel placed a stack of Celeste's handwritten journals on the table. In addition to the videos, Celeste meticulously documented every detail. She kept records of conversations, of missing items, even of objects taken without permission. Amanda's voice trembled. "This isn't real." She wasn't thinking clearly. She was, Daniel said firmly. Her cognitive evaluations, performed by 3 separate specialists, confirm her full mental capacity up until her passing. No one spoke, no one moved. They didn't need to. The truth had spoken for itself. Celeste had made her choice. And it was me. They couldn't accept it. Even when Celeste's words filled the room, even when the proof was laid bare, they refused to believe that she had chosen me. The silence after the will reading didn't last long. It curdled quickly into something vicious, something sharp. The battle wasn't over, it had just begun. Within days, I became the target of a carefully orchestrated campaign. It started with phone calls, some from Amanda, others from Bernard's lawyers. They all had the same thinly veiled demand: withdraw, relinquish the inheritance, walk away quietly. When I didn't respond, the threats escalated. Anonymous stories began appearing online, subtly questioning my professional integrity. Whispers that I had neglected my patients to manipulate my grandmother spread rapidly. I overheard two nurses at the clinic talking about me in the break room. One of them looked up, startled when she saw me. She offered a nervous smile, but I could already feel the walls closing in. I was called into the director's office that afternoon. "Emily, I trust you," Dr. Samuel said gently. "But these rumors are gaining traction. Some families have expressed concern. They're considering pulling their loved ones from your care." It was a gut punch. My work, my reputation, things I had spent years building were crumbling under the weight of their lies. That night, exhausted and numb, I returned to Celeste's house. I wandered through the quiet halls, the place that was now legally mine, but felt like someone else's battlefield. I needed answers. Something more than the video Daniel had played at the reading. I found it in Celeste's study. Tucked behind a row of dusty ledgers was a small, steel safe I had never noticed before. I remembered the faintest of memories Celeste once whispering to me that not everything of value sits on a shelf. The passcode came to me in a heartbeat, her wedding anniversary. Inside, neatly organized, was the arsenal she had left behind. There were more video files, hours of footage, each labeled with dates and names, medical records showing her cognitive evaluations from multiple specialists, all confirming her full mental clarity, printed emails, text message screenshots, handwritten notes, even lists of missing items with dates and suspected culprits. It wasn't just a defense, it was a masterstroke. Celeste hadn't simply left me her estate, she had armed me for this exact war. I called Daniel the next morning. "I need someone who can fight," I told him, "not just defend." He put me in touch with Lily Chen, a litigation attorney known for her precision and her refusal to lose. When I arrived at Lily's office, she didn't waste time asking me how I felt. She reviewed the files, the videos, the medical documents with a surgeon's focus. "This is airtight," she said finally, closing the folder. "Your grandmother knew exactly what she was doing. And now we do too." We moved swiftly. Lily drafted formal demands for the immediate return of every item that had been removed from Celeste's property's furniture, jewelry, even artwork. She filed a detailed inventory with the probate court, each item supported by photographic evidence and time-stamped video footage. She also filed a motion to dismiss Bernard's lawsuit contesting the will, attaching Celeste's medical evaluations, video testimonies, and documentation as exhibits. But Lily didn't stop there. We arranged a mandatory family meeting at her firm's conference room, this time with legal representation for both sides. I arrived early, nerves taut but controlled. One by one, they entered Amanda, Bernard, Lucas, Jared, and their attorneys, their faces a blend of defiance and apprehension. Bernard's lawyer began speaking first, repeating the same accusations I had heard for weeks: undue influence, mental incapacity, manipulation. Lily let him finish, her expression calm, almost amused. When he sat down, she clicked a remote, and the screen on the wall flickered to life. Celeste's face appeared once again, but this time, it wasn't just the prepared statement from the will reading. It was personal. It was specific. In the first video, Celeste described a conversation she had with Amanda when Amanda pressured her to sign over property titles. In the next, she detailed how Lucas had taken valuables from her bedroom while pretending to help her organize. 17 videos played in sequence, each naming names, each dated and verified. There was no escape. Amanda visibly trembled. Bernard's face turned to stone. Lucas sank lower in his chair with each passing video. When the screen went dark, Lily handed their attorneys a printed list of the missing items and the legal deadlines for their return. "You have 7 days," she said simply. "Failure to comply will result in immediate legal action." There was no rebuttal. They had nothing left to stand on. Within a week, the items began trickling back. Some were delivered by movers, others by courier. There were no apologies, no explanations, just a silent surrender. The lawsuit was quietly withdrawn days later, but the damage was permanent. Whatever threads had once loosely bound us as a family had snapped completely. Celeste had won, and I had stood my ground. The lawsuit dissolved, the stolen items returned, and the last of their threats silenced. But victory didn't feel the way I thought it would. I had reclaimed what was mine. I had defended Celeste's wishes. But the battlefield I stood on was quiet now, eerily so. The war had ended, but the hollow space it left behind lingered. I didn't mourn the loss of those relationships. Maybe I never really had them to begin with. Still, what remained was a silence that asked me, what would you choose now? Emily, I had spent so much time standing my ground, fighting for what was right, that I hadn't thought about what came after. But life has a way of asking those questions whether you're ready or not. The first decision I made was unexpected, even to myself. I called each family member, one by one. Not their attorneys, not their assistants. I called them directly. I offered them each the chance to choose a small keepsake from Celeste's belongings, something of sentimental value, something that wouldn't appear on an insurance ledger. Not the hotel, not the lake house, not the investment portfolios. Simple things. The cookbook with handwritten notes, the music box that sat by her window, the watercolor painting she finished one summer before her arthritis made it too painful to hold a brush. Some of them refused to speak to me, the sharp edge of pride still too deeply wedged in their throats. Bernard declined coldly. Amanda answered my call but spoke only long enough to tell me she wanted nothing. Jared never responded at all. But Lucas surprised me. He asked quietly if the old leather-bound recipe journal was still there, the one where Celeste had written down family recipes in her delicate handwriting. She once taught me to make strawberry pie, he said, his voice cracking a little. I didn't think she'd remember. She always remembered. I told him. He picked up the journal himself. He didn't stay long, but when he left, he said something I didn't expect. She always liked you more, he said, but there was no bitterness in it. She just saw you. Maybe he was beginning to see me too. I didn't offer them anything because I wanted to mend the family. I didn't do it because I sought forgiveness or approval. I did it because I realized I had already chosen who I wanted to be, and I didn't want to carry the weight of being another person who shut doors forever. Some doors, though, would remain closed by choice. I turned my attention to building something Celeste would have been proud of. I established the Celeste Patterson Memorial Scholarship, supporting students in psychology who plan to work with elderly patients. I expanded my clinic to offer free mental health services to seniors with no family, people who had been forgotten or dismissed, just as Celeste had nearly been. And I took the trip Celeste and I had always talked about but never managed to plan. I traveled across Europe, wandering through cobbled streets in Florence, tracing the canals in Amsterdam, and sitting alone at sun-drenched cafes in Lisbon. I didn't search for anyone's approval there. I didn't carry anyone's expectations. For the first time, I belonged entirely to myself. I kept a simple routine, quiet mornings, long walks, and nights spent writing letters I would never send. When I returned to Boston, I found the house didn't feel like a fortress anymore. It felt like home. One crisp autumn morning, I stood on the balcony of the Patterson Central Hotel, now fully mine. The city stretched out before me, busy and indifferent. The same streets that once made me feel invisible now simply felt like mine to walk. I looked out over the skyline, thinking of Celeste, of the wars we'd fought together, of the quiet afternoons where no one else had cared to sit with her, of the pearl necklace she had given me not because it was valuable, but because it was hers. We did it. I whispered to the wind, a soft affirmation that didn't need to echo. I realized then that I had spent most of my life waiting for the family to let me in, waiting for an invitation, waiting for permission to be part of something they had already decided I wasn't worthy of. But I didn't need their permission. I never had. Dignity doesn't ask for entry. It doesn't wait for a seat at the table. It exists, unshaken, whether anyone chooses to recognize it or not. Standing on that balcony, I didn't need to win anything else. I didn't need to prove anything. I didn't need their apologies. I turned, walked calmly back inside, and gently closed the glass door behind me. Some victories aren't loud. Some stories don't end with applause. Some simply end with a quiet choice to keep walking forward without needing anyone to watch.